Joining us now is Rupert Russell. He's an expert on commodities. He's the author of Price Wars. Let's put this up there on the screen. How the commodities markets made our chaotic world. And Rupert is here to talk with us about how the war in Ukraine is having a major crisis in terms of the food crisis and in terms of embattled farmers. Rupert, first of all, thank you so much for joining us. Just outline a little bit how your background is informed, what you see happening right now with the Ukraine situation.
Sure. So the past 4 years, I spent writing this book, Price Wars, and also making a documentary film that went along with it. And it was essentially an investigation into the tumultuous 2010s. I covered everything from the global financial crisis to the Arab Spring, the war in Ukraine, the collapse in Venezuela, even the US border crisis. And what I was able to do was link each of these events to spikes in the global commodity markets. And what was even more worrying was that there was, in fact, a feedback loop whereby a spike in the markets would create war, riot, revolution. That would cause markets to spike. And then in turn, we would have a kind of feedback loop. And this is precisely what we're seeing right now. In 2021, we saw energy prices going up, oil and gas. This fueled the Kremlin's coffers. This emboldened Putin, by the way, just as it did in 2008 and 2014, where we saw similar commodity price rises and high prices. This then created, unfortunately, the war as we know. It fueled the war. It enabled the war in February. And it has, in turn, caused a commodity price shock, which is now being felt globally. So we're now seeing high oil prices, high food prices. Those prices are also extremely volatile, and that's also feeding into inflation worldwide, which is essentially causing every single government in the world that's exposed to these markets to become increasingly unpopular and creating domestic political crises.
And so is your theory basically you track how these commodity price shocks ultimately leads to destabilization and unrest in countries around the world?
Absolutely. So food prices in particular, in many parts of the world, particularly the Middle East, are part of a kind of social contract. It's called the democracy of bread, whereby regimes derive their legitimacy from making life livable, and that usually means guaranteeing the price of food. But of course, the price of oil is also very, very important. We can see in the United States there's a similar social contract around gas prices, whereby we see presidential approval ratings ebb and flow with the gas price. And even at the beginning of this year, in January, the Kazakhstan government was overthrown when they cut fuel subsidies, essentially doubling the price of fuel. So prices are an extremely important part of the bedrock of political systems. And of course, this isn't a new phenomenon. This goes all the way back to the French Revolution and, Marie Antoinette's famous quip, let them eat cake.
Whenever I'm looking here at what you're talking about the loss of major supplies with farmers and more, can you just go into what this means also for Ukraine itself? I mean, it almost feels terrible to, say, how is this going to affect our food price? But what about them? Are they going to have the supplies that they need? Because we see Russians also intentionally targeting some of their grain reserves.
Absolutely. Of course, this is going to be a gigantic catastrophe for Ukraine, in particularly getting in not just raw commodities such as diesel and food, although they have some in supplies, but also getting in refined products such as diesel, which is absolutely fundamental for their economy, for their farmers, but also for the war effort as well.
Mm-hmm. And so are we seeing any signs of that global political unrest around the world that maybe hasn't really popped up in the American media yet?
Absolutely. We're beginning to see the start of it. So we're seeing social protests happening in Peru, Argentina, Indonesia, Tunisia, India, and of course Sri Lanka as well. So we're sort of beginning to see the start of unrest, but we're by no means at the kind of avalanche level we were in 2010 and 2011 with the Arab Spring. And one of the reasons is that those disturbances never ended. The civil war in Libya is still going on. The same is true for Syria and for Yemen as well.
And so, I mean, the final question I really have for you, Rupert, is what can we do about it? Is there anything that the West can realistically do about what has happened here, or is this a relative inevitability?
The commodity price shock was caused by Putin's invasion of Ukraine, but it's absolutely been amplified by the way in which the West, and America in particular, has structured the global commodity markets. The rising food prices are in part speculators pricing in perceived risk and perceived shortages globally. But it's worth remembering that even though Russia and Ukraine account for 25% of the world's exports, they actually only account for 0.9% of global wheat production. That's to say that most production is done domestically by countries. And so what you're seeing is sort of two things happening simultaneously. One is those countries that Ukraine's wheat was destined to. Unfortunately, some of these countries are very vulnerable, such as Bangladesh, Lebanon, Yemen. Those are going to have to source their wheat from more expensive places because Ukrainian wheat is relatively cheap, and that's going to lead to higher prices simply on switching suppliers. And that's really where the US and other players needs to really kind of step in and make sure they can get affordable wheat. The other part of this, remember, is that this isn't just about where is Ukraine's wheat going. It's about the global price of wheat, which everybody has to pay, right? So those commodity prices you see on the exchanges in Chicago and Atlanta really impact the local prices of food everywhere from Argentina to Sri Lanka to Cairo. And unfortunately, those are being exacerbated by the ways in which the commodity markets have been financialized. We're seeing it amplified by algorithmic traders, trend followers. Also, we're seeing retail investors getting in on this. There are sort of Reddit forums like with GameStop where people are investing through ETFs on wheat futures. And lastly, which is what worries me the most, is that many institutional investors are using commodities as an inflation hedge. That's to say that to kind of diversify their portfolios and protect against inflation in the US, they park a bunch of their money in commodity futures. And this has the self-fulfilling effect of actually causing commodity prices to rise, and that in turn fuels inflation. So that piece of it is absolutely underneath US regulatory jurisdiction. And it should have been stopped in 2011 when it was identified as a problem. It was legislated in Dodd-Frank, but unfortunately, due to many lawsuits launched by Wall Street, there it was not implemented. And now is definitely the time.
That's such an important point. I mean, throughout modern human history, price of bread is a very good determinant of whether you're going to have social unrest. And so this is a really important one to keep your eye on. Guys, the book is Price Wars. We recommend it to all of you. Rupert, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks, Rupert. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
Pleasure.
Thank you guys so much for watching. We really appreciate it. Premium subscribers, as a reminder, you guys have an email that will be coming your way, kind of state of the breaking points as we approach our 1-year anniversary. It's been our great privilege in order to do this show. If you can support us, of course, we deeply appreciate it, especially, times like this, especially the most insane ones, trying to break it all down for people. I always hear, I'm sure you do, crew, I so appreciate the way you're able to talk to each other, and I wish it would all look like this, and so do we. That's why we're working to build a new mainstream. We're hiring a lot more people. We've got big things in the works, and we'll get into that in the happier times. Thank you all so much for your support, of course, and we will see you all next week.
Love y'all. See you on Monday. Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.